70 years worth of peaceful diplomacy, 70 years worth of positive diplomatic involvement, and 70 years worth of democratic reason have not proven that Japan is both a state capable of making democratic decisions and also deserving of its own military, then nothing ever will. I'm proud to propose a motion which understands that legitimacy is often tied to states being able to protect their citizens' wills, to states being able to actively, democratically represent their citizens in a military way. So bearing that in mind, let's look at three important questions. First of all, this idea of necessity. Second of all, this idea of the concept of defense and retroactive force versus attack. And last, this idea of legitimacy. First, necessity. We tell you that from the beginning of the debate, we told you that the phrasing of this motion, which speaks to the concept of abolition, which is already established within Japan to mean a 2/3 majority within parliament and a majority vote in a national referendum, this is a democratic concept that cannot be broken in Japan, means that this debate only takes place in a Japan in which the majority has voted for this abolishment to take place. They never once contested that limitation. Thankfully, there was no death challenge from them in this debate. So bearing that in mind, we have to assume the fact that this debate only takes place in a Japan where the majority of people feel like there's a necessity, where the majority of politicians feels that there's a necessity. But beyond that, under their own context, they told us that more and more support is bolstering up for crazy right-wing people who say they're going to attack China. That means that they're conceding to the fact that there is an atmosphere of fear within Japan, that there's an atmosphere of growing fear in the face of China. We tell you their own context concedes necessity. Second of all, this concept of defense versus attack. And Rebecca and we as a whole told you time and time again that the specific context of Japan is such that defense just isn't enough, that the biggest problem is indirect threats that they currently can't protect themselves against. But Bella told you that you can still defend yourself against them. But they ignored the fact that the threat itself is a nuclear one, that the only way you can neutralize a nuclear threat, and this is the case study we'll provided you with, is something like within the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States steps in and through the use of intimidatory military bases persuades China to get rid of its submarine bases in places like Hainan. You can't just assert, Grant, and make a joke about not being able to prevent nuclear threats when we provided you with hard analysis there. But we heard from Townsend this idea that the revision of Article 9 gets rid of a binding contract of the USA to Japan. But that ignores my analysis, which tells you that the USA doesn't really care about democratic obligations and cares far more about real military alliances, cares more about being able to have a military base in states. I think that we can all see that the side which understands the reality of a military state, an aggressive state like the United States, understands that a 70-year-old democratic obligation is just not as powerful as a modern-day military alliance which provides active benefits for the United States. So now that we've finished with the section in which we had any engagement from side opposition, let's look at the section in which we had none. Right from the beginning of the debate, all three of us told you that when people feel they need to be protected, when the majority of a population feel it's necessary to possess a military, it's principally unacceptable for you to prevent that state from getting access to that military. There was not a single response along this principled analysis throughout this debate from side opposition. They have to lose because this is a debate about abolishment, because this is a debate about a context in which the vast majority of Japan feels they need an army. I'm proud to stand beside William and Rebecca.